Tiny homes have been the topic of many real estate discussions over the past several years, right up there with barn-dominiums. But are they worth even considering? Salutations, good people, I'm Josh, and a lot of today's video may apply to where you live, but today we're going to be talking about South Carolina, and more specifically, upstate South Carolina. So to start, let's talk about who might be interested in a tiny home. Maybe you're younger and you're looking to buy a home, but today's housing prices just aren't feasible right now. Because if we're being honest, today's prices aren't exactly ideal. Maybe you're a more seasoned adult and you're at a place in life where the kids have left and you're looking to downsize. Or perhaps you currently own a home and you have a lot of extra land, and placing a tiny home on your current property could be beneficial for a number of reasons. Whatever your case, the trend over the past 5 or so years has been, if it's tiny, it's trendy. The tiny house movement has taken over a surge of interest when it comes to minimalism, simplified living trends, and reducing your carbon footprint. However, the industry and the process of making a tiny house work for you is actually a lot more complicated than it might appear. To finding a place to build said tiny house, or figuring out exactly how tiny is too tiny. To say the least, it's worth taking a look before you jump headfirst into figuring out if this lifestyle is right for you. While there's a ton of good reasons to invest and make the shift over into that lifestyle change, such as ending the vicious cycle of mortgage debt, maybe a simplified way of living, helping create a better environment, I'm going to tell you about some things you should consider if you haven't quite made it to this stage in your process just yet. Depending on where you want to live and your location with where you want to put your tiny home, there are a lot of restrictions and processes that come with doing this. And I can't stress enough how these restrictions are going to vary wildly depending on your location. Not just the state, but it can come down to the county and even the city. Let's take upstate South Carolina, for example. When it comes to Greenville County, you are allowed to have a tiny home. This county follows the building codes written in the International Residential Code, meaning that as long as you follow these guidelines, you're all set. According to the IRC, your tiny home cannot exceed more than 400 square feet in Greenville County and must have a minimum ceiling height of 6 foot 8 inches. You also have to acquire building permits and have the home pass an inspection before building is complete. You'll still want to communicate with your local zoning department, as some areas in that county may prohibit the build of tiny houses. And while the county may allow for tiny homes to be anywhere, it's wise to stay up to date with the most current zoning laws. Now let's talk about Spartanburg County. You are allowed to have a tiny home as long as it's not on wheels. I guess they thought of the old phrase, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a wagon. Well, if your tiny home has wheels, it might as well be an RV. Again, with Spartanburg County, a minimum of 400 square feet is the rule, height of the ceiling at 6 foot 8 inches, and an inspection has to be done before the building of the home is considered complete. Now, moving to Anderson County, you're going to have pretty much the same restrictions due to the county adopting Appendix Q back in 2018, meaning that you can have a tiny home as long as it's up to the international code. Anderson County is a good example that even though it may not allow for a tiny home now, it could have potential to allow you to do so in the future when it comes to your respective location, which is a nice segue over into the county that I currently live in, Pickens County, which is very close to Anderson and Greenville County. At this time, Pickens County just does not allow for the build of tiny homes at all. It doesn't look like this is going to be permanent by any means because the county is looking to implement some guidelines to allow for the build of tiny homes. Now, considering how close all these counties are, you can see the importance of having to check if your county or city allows for the build of tiny homes, especially when neighboring counties, one has a green light, one does not. Now let's briefly talk about the loan process for a tiny home. According to my good friend Joe Ridings with Prime Lending, when it comes to the upstate of South Carolina, as long as you own your own plot of land and it's allowed in that area, tiny homes follow the process of a typical house, as long as it has a standard foundation and not a steel frame. It's going to be vital to check with your lender in your area to make sure this is going to be possible. And while you may have done your own research and watched a ton of videos on the average cost of a tiny home, the price could vary widely based on what you're looking for in a home and what your goals are. And even though you probably already know this, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, if you build your home by yourself, then of course you're going to cut out labor costs. You're going to save a ton of money. However, hiring a professional is definitely going to cost more money, but that peace of mind you're going to get knowing that it's been done by a professional, and possibly a professional who's done this hundreds or thousands of times, that's just priceless. However, I'm going to give you the best rough estimated ballpark figure I can. And I'm going to do this by reading a snippet from zookcabins.com, which has provided to be a reliable source in the past. Zookcabins.com says that tiny homes can vary in price in many ways: land fees, location, and how large your home is. Most commonly, you'll find yourself paying anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 for a standard tiny home. However, higher end models could range anywhere from $90,000 to $100,000 plus. And of course, that price is going to be dependent on the features you have, if you want to go a little bit bigger than your traditional standard tiny home, and if that county even allows for a bigger tiny home. Considering the median cost of a home in South Carolina right now, this is still a far cheaper option. On the flip side, the minimum size home you can have in South Carolina is 70 square feet, which from what I've seen seems to be the standard across the United States. I would like to encourage you with a positive story by Ryan Mitchell, who is the author of the Tiny Life book. Ryan has been living tiny since the recession of '08. Simply put, he lost his job and never wanted to be in the same financial situation ever again. And he currently has a tiny house in North Carolina. Ryan says this: "I can be a relatively smart person who has a degree and works hard and still not have financial security. I remember sitting in the parking lot thinking, I don't know how to pay rent. I never want to have to worry about paying for basic necessities just to get by. Half of my income was going towards housing. His rent, utilities, and insurance used to cost him $1,500 a month, which actually nowadays sounds great. Now Ryan pays for water, propane, and land taxes for about $15 a month, while I'm pretty sure I pay about $15 for Netflix." So whether you're younger and just starting out, or you're older and you want to downsize and just not have to worry about the maintenance of a much bigger home, or you just don't want to feel like you're caught up in the rat race paying for a high dollar mortgage, a tiny home may just be a really good option for you. And with that, I encourage you to do your own due diligence, as everything I talked about today is not an exhaustive list of potential requirements and things to consider when considering this lifestyle. Because if you can come to terms with not having as much space as you currently do, which may include getting rid of a lot of clothes, if that doesn't apply to you, then I say go for it. And if there's anything I can do in upstate South Carolina when it comes to a tiny home or a traditional house or even land, my information will be right here, and I'd be happy to help you any way I can. Until next time, I've been Josh with Upstate SC Living and Real Broker LLC, reminding you to work hard, be kind, and do enjoy yourselves.